first of all, this is Gary Kent and Joe O'Connell. Joe used to write for the Dallas Morning News and is now down in Austin. Actually, they both live in Austin. We did a roundtable
when we were starting.
When you were starting.
And the movie had a different name.
Yes.
The distributor didn't like my name.
Was it did we determine that was 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Something like it. It took a long time. It took a long time to figure out how to make a documentary.
Right.
I'm now almost done with my second one, which took a whole lot less time. So, we have a rough cut that we got like this past week.
So we'll get into all of that.
Yeah,
sure.
But
I just wanted to let y'all know that I was so thrilled to have them both up here. And so Gary Kent is a stuntman. He will tell you all of the films he's been on.
He's the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah.
He is. He's the real thing. He is Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, at least partially. He was on the Spahn Ranch, encountered Charles Manson. Is this something that's included in the documentary?
Well, let's get started.
Okay. All right.
So here we go. So Joe, why don't you start out and you tell us the history of you
A history
and
of me.
kind of where you came to become a documentarian.
I was a newspaper reporter and editor, and I quit. I tried to quit to go study creative writing, and I got an MFA in creative writing, and I have a book, novel and stories called Evacuation Plan. But I've also always had an interest in film, and I started a column for the Austin American-Statesman about the film industry, thinking that no one else was doing it, not realizing that Jane Sumner had been doing it at the Dallas Morning News for forever.
Yes.
And then 4 years later, I moved to the Austin Chronicle because they tried to change my column into something that I didn't like. They wanted me to do it with other people. And I did that for a number of years. And 1 year in, Jane Sumner had been laid off from the Dallas Morning News. And I talked to the editor and said, hey, I'm the only guy who does this. I had become kind of an expert on the Texas film industry. So I started the unfortunately named, and I did not name it, column in the Dallas Morning News called Shot in Texas, which is never a good thing for Dallas in my mind. But So, and did that for a number of years. And I quit mainly because I wanted to do my own creative pursuits. And I had begun working on this documentary with him because I met Gary 20 years ago at a writers' conference, and he was so fascinating and I immediately went out and rented the movie when you could still go rent movies easily. I rented Satan's Sadist, which is an Al Adamson biker film in which Gary stars as the good guy Vietnam vet and sticks somebody's head down the toilet. And it's like, I got to track him down and I got to write about him. And so I did. And I write some for the San Antonio Express News too, and I wrote for the Austin American-Statesman and the San Antonio Express News at that time about him. We became friends, and I kept telling him someone needed to do a documentary about his life. He was coming out with a memoir, and I realized that person was me. So I set about figuring out how to do that, and it was a long process to figure out how to do it. But his story is fascinating, and it's not just about it's about the independent film scene of the 60s and 70s. It's about his career. It's also about his personal life. His wife, Tommy Barrett, who was an actress in some of his films. He did a lot of classic horror films. He and Tommy were in The Forest, which is a classic B-movie horror film. He did a lot of B-movies. He was in biker films, horror films, all that kind of stuff, westerns. And he's worked more than 100 films. He's the most fascinating guy, and I realized that his story was what needed to be told. So there you have it.
You about said it.
Yeah,
we can all go.
We spent the afternoon with another one of the stunt guys featured in the documentary who lives here outside of Dallas, named Chuck Bale. And Chuck Bale was the star of the movie The Stuntman. Which,
one of the stars.
Yeah, if you don't know the movie The Stuntman, you should watch it. It was an Academy Award nominee. Won one Academy Award, I believe. That's what Chuck was saying for screenplay. It's the weirdest, most incredible movie. It's not a B movie, but it's about stuntmen, and it's a really intricate puzzle of a movie that will survive for a long time. That's what I was telling Chuck. But he lives right outside of Dallas, and we went to visit him. So we have come directly from there, which was very fun.
Where did you, with so much material out there about him, it was kind of hard to see where to start. Where did you start, and where did you go from there?
Yeah, it's weird because one of the reviews for the film said it's like it's two movies. And I don't think that's a criticism, actually, because I kind of like that. Because the first half of the movie is talking more about that era in film and his careers, and we kind of organized it by directors. He worked a lot with Richard Rush, who was the director of The Stuntman, and other films he worked in, like Hell's Angels on Wheels, Satan's Sadists, great. They all had great titles. And then we talked about Al Adamson, and Al Adamson is with Ed Wood considered one of the great bad directors, I guess. Gary was the last person to talk to Al before Al was murdered, which is something we also cover in the documentary. And we hit some of these guys. Ray Dennis Steckler is another one that we talk about pretty extensively. And I knew what I wanted to do. And from the beginning of this, so I'm a fiction writer, I had a sense of the structure of it. And it's talking about that film industry and then starting to talk about Gary's relationship with his wife and the movies they did together. And then the tough part was the end. And so the last act is Gary now. And the message is one of resilience because he's still making movies. He's 86 years old and he's still making movies. So that was not to ruin the end of the movie if you haven't seen it, was the last thing he says is find something you like to do and enjoy doing in life and do it till you die. Which I think is a message for all of us that you shouldn't mess around. You should do what you want to do, Hopefully you're doing that, but young people want to hang out with Gary. People in their 20s want to hang out with him, male and female, want to hang out with Gary. I'm serious. Because they get that message coming from him. I'm talking a lot about you. You got to talk now. All right.
Gary, what was it like? The studios these days can go almost anywhere in film, but when you started, you had Spawn Ranch, and then I think around the 60s and 70s, Corriganville was kind of at its end of its heyday. Crash Corrigan owned that ranch. What was it like filming on those ranches where you had to stay within that 30-mile zone?
It was great because you got off the studio lot. So it was kind of like going on location in a way. The lunches would be catered, the breakfast catered, which is always free food. But yeah, Corriganville, Iverson Ranch, which was right across the street from the Spawn Ranch. There were no TV antennas, no light poles or anything, so you could shoot westerns or films from the 20s or 30s without worrying about it. Iverson's was a little upscale from Spawn Ranch. Spawn Ranch was kind of Spawn Ranch is where Charlie Manson and his gang hung out. It was kind of downscale, a little dilapidated, like George Spahn, the guy that ran it. But it was just fun shooting there. It was. What
was Corriganville like?
Corriganville was really upscale because, as you know, Crash Corrigan had been that's why they built Corriganville. And there's a great book out now called Charlie Manson and the Killing of Shorty Shea by Edwin Colvin, who grew up in Corriganville. He was a little kid, and he talks about life on the Corriganville ranch when his dad was the construction man on Corriganville. So he talks about all the great westerns that were shot there and things on Corriganville, yeah.
Is it kind of weird driving out to Spawn Ranch and Corriganville and the old Iverson Ranch? Because when you guys were filming out there was nothing. The 118 wasn't there. Yeah. It took a long time to get out there. Now you can lickety split go.
You're there, yeah, in a second. Yeah, it was you'd load up big trucks full of equipment and stuff and haul your butt out there to shoot. But again, it was a great experience to get away from those big studio gates that closed and made you feel like you were in an institution, So yeah, it was a freedom to do your thing out there in the open.
Gary, can you talk a little bit about the difference in being a stuntman if you were starting out today than it would be when you did start out? How tough do they have to work these days?
When I started in stunts, I went to LA to be an actor. And all the actors were out of work. And I thought, no, that's not for me. I want to work. And I had heard about these guys called stunt people. So Jack Nicholson, who was just getting started, was going up to Utah to make 2 Westerns. And they said he's looking for a stuntman. So I said, I'm a stuntman. And luckily, they hired me. I went up to Utah, and when we were there filming the Daniel, I was just falling on the ground. I didn't know you dig it up and you wear pads and rubber guns and stuff. So the Daniel Boone company came up to shoot, and they had 4 of the best stuntmen in the business. And they wanted 1 more, but they didn't want to send back to California. So Nicholson said, I've got a great stuntman. He doesn't use pads. He doesn't do anything. He just, well, they said, send him over, send him over. So they sent me over to Daniel Boone, and after they made a lot of fun of me and put me through the ropes, they started teaching me what it was all about. And in those days, there were no stunt schools where you could go and study how to do stunts. It was pretty much, you'd better learn, meet a stunt guy and carry his bag for him for nothing for a little while until they trusted you enough to give you a gag to do. A gag being a stunt. A gig would be a job, and a gag would be the stunt. So, there were no stunt schools, and it was like being hired by somebody that knew and trusted you, and then you became part of this great brotherhood, sisterhood kind of thing. So, today, there are 10 million stunt schools all over the place, and it's so CGI'd to death. It's just not like the old days where you really crashed cars and you really rolled them and you really did high falls and now they just do it all by computer and you just stand there and pretend like you're falling. They put a green screen behind you. So it's changed a lot. Not that they still don't do dangerous stuff, because they do. It's the only job on a movie where you can get killed or even hurt, really badly, and it happens every year. So, and we're a little bit miffed that the Academy still does not recognize stuntmen, because the studios don't want you to know it's not really Tom Cruise, it's his stunt guy. They want to keep the magic, and you can't blame them.
And there's a push to change that.
Can you kind of talk about what filmmaking was like back then? Because a lot of the films that you were on, they were just cranking them out. I mean, it was down and dirty, and you were going from literally one production to another week by week. And it's so different from what it is today. So you kind of talk about what it was like.
Good question. Thank you. The thing that happened that was lucky for us was television came in. So Mom and Dad kept the kids home to watch TV, and the drive-ins had no product. And the studios, majors, avoided the drive-ins, and at the time it was sort of a down thing. So they were looking for product, and it gave a chance for all these young filmmakers to get their films made and distributed and shown. In a way that's kind of similar today because of the change in equipment.
Right.
If you got $10, you can go rent a camera and go shoot a movie. Doesn't mean it's going to be good, or you can get it shown, but you can shoot one. And that was kind of the feeling then, that all the outlaws were running around making movies, which was good because it gave us a lot of work. Yeah.
And there's crazy people like Steckler, who was really just his neighbor. He said, Gary, you want to make a movie? I'm making a movie about serial killers. You want to come star in it? I mean, that's literal, right?
Yeah.
That is Thrill Killers, which is kind of a cult film that he starred in.
It's just down and dirty the way that they just made these movies, and they were like literally cranking them out week by week by week. And now these films are considered, some of them are considered cult, favorites. And
Yeah.
I mean, how does it make you feel to have Hell Angels on Wheels and films like that you worked on that are now being pressed into Blu-ray and they're being celebrated by Alamo and other releasing companies? How does that make you feel? That did you ever know when you were making this film that this would happen 50, 60 years?
Hadn't a clue, but I love it. I love the fact that they're getting some notice. The great thing about them, thank you for that question. The great thing then was, because you didn't have a lot of money and you weren't a studio film, you had to make up stuff. You had to figure out how to do things without a lot of money. So it was, and you did a lot of different jobs. On the major studios, an actor didn't pick up a reflector and carry it. Whereas on the independent, you would hold a reflector, you know. After you did your close-up, you'd hold the light for the... So you got to really be part of filmmaking and learn how to make films, a lot about it. And it was just it was better. Quentin Tarantino, who's a pal of mine in a way, said, forget film school, go get on a film. And in a way he's right, because film school doesn't really teach you how to make a film. They teach you sort of the gymnastics, but the actual making of a film, the nit and grit, you can only get by doing it.
Do you feel you got better education than the people today in film schools that are paying $50,000, $60,000 to go to school? Do you feel like you got a better education by actually being thrown in literally and doing it?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. You would learn very quickly, and you'd get a chance to work with very well-known actors who were sort of on their way down, and they would get hired on these so they could get their health benefits. Because SAG, if you're a member of SAG, your health benefits run out in 3 years unless you do more films. So they would get cast again and get their health benefits, but you'd get a chance to work with great people like Scott Brady, you know, John Carradine, those people who you grew up watching on the big screen. And you'd get a chance to work with the young people coming up, like Laszlo Kovacs, who became a great DP. I don't know how, 6 or 7 films with Laszlo, who was just getting started. In case you don't know, Laszlo Kovacs is one of the best cameramen, directors of photography to come out of film. He escaped from Hungary. He and his buddy Wilmo Zsigmond carried their film. They shot the Hungarian Revolution, then carried their film out and would hide it in haystacks at night.
Wow.
So the Germans wouldn't get them, the Russians, and they would dress as peasants so they could sneak their film out. And they finally got to the States and eventually put it together as a documentary. But you got to work with those guys, and they were just great, great DPs.
Is there a stunt that you look back on that you say, I can't believe I did that? I'm like, what?
Oh, man.
What was I thinking?
And then that's a good question. No, because if you're going to do a stunt, and you're a real stunt person, today, all the actors say, I'm a stunt person, and they've done a slap or something. Stunts are doing 100-foot high falls and crashing cars and rolling them and getting in major fights and, you know, some wicked stuff. But if you have a stunt to do, you think it over. So you do all your thinking way ahead of time, so that by the time you do the stunt, you're not even thinking about it. You're just doing it because you've gone over it and over it. And so I look back on some today that I really like.
Yeah.
That I thought, man, that was good. I'm glad I did that. And I enjoy watching it. I sit in my little room at night watching the
That's awesome.
that kind of thing. So I have some of those, that I like.
There's one here. Oh, go ahead.
Is there one that's like technically your favorite? That's your
Yeah, I did a picture called Psych Out for my favorite director, Richard Rush. And it starred Jack Nicholson, Bruce Dern, a bunch of other people. But I got to act in it. I got to play a bad guy, and I got to act with Jack Nicholson. And I also did the special effects, a lot of firework. And that was, again, before CGI, so it's real fire that I was working with on it. And I did a great car hit where I get hit by a car and bounced off into a truck and then off of the truck over the hood of another car and then crash my head on the concrete. When I see that stunt, I go, I don't believe I did that. But I'm very proud of it. I like the look of it. Thank you.
Gary, in Danger God, you sing a song called Thank You for Sharing.
Right.
I'm wondering how difficult it was for you to share the tough things you talk about.
I'm sorry?
The tough things you talk about.
How difficult it was to share the tough things you talked about.
About Tommy and other things. How tough was that?
Oh, that's a little tough. Yeah. I lost my wife to cancer. She was much younger than I by 16 years. So I thought, man, she's going to outlive me by many, many years. but she passed away pretty young, 54, and that was very tough, and it's tough for me to address that to this day, because I just love that lady so much. She was just great. So yeah, I miss her a lot.
And there are some moments in the film that I think he still has a hard time with.
Right.
Some of those very personal moments, because there are very personal moments near the end of the movie. There's a moment where he goes back to his home state of Washington, and he goes back to the University of Washington. Gary was a third-string quarterback for the Washington Huskies for a very young coach named Darrell Royal. I don't know if anybody knows
Who
who that
later
is.
on became the coach at UT.
Yeah, a couple of years later, after that, he was hired by the University of Texas. And we went back to the campus, and that was like a very nostalgic moment. We went back there, and his sister died.
My sister had just died, and we went to the funeral, Joe and I kept it all in until after the funeral, and we were driving out to the campus to visit my old fraternity house. And on the way, it all caught up with me, so I have a minor moment where I fall apart and we...
That's okay.
Yeah.
Is there a particular film that you have done that has not been released on home video or streaming services that you wish that was going to be released, that you wish the public would see?
Yeah, now I don't know if it's been released now, but for a long, long time you couldn't get it. And there's a picture called Freebie and the Bean with Alan Arkin and James Caan, which we shot in San Francisco. Some of the best car chases I've ever done in my life. Chuck Bale gaffed him.
I'm sure
They
it's a
just
great
played it at
movie.
the Alamo, but you have a hard time getting it on. You couldn't get it for the longest time, and maybe you can now. I'm not sure. But if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's very funny.
When we started the documentary, there are two films of his that are lost, and one of them was found, and we actually included it in the documentary originally, but I found what we shot to be kind of boring. So I ended up cutting it out. That's the kind of decision you make, which is called Secret Places, Secret Things, which he directed. But there's another movie that is still lost, and it was done by Al Adamson, and Al Adamson's producing partner, Sam Sherman, has no idea where it is. And it's interesting because it's a Western, and Gary shot it at Spawn Ranch. And that's where he met Charles Manson. It's called Lash of Lust. And you say that you have some incredible stunts in it that you would like to see, but you've never seen the movie.
Yeah, I've never seen the movie and I've never seen the stunts, but I did a great saddle fall. And then I did a fight with Jimmy Lemp, who at the time had just been a defensive back for the Minnesota Vikings. We did a fight out in the desert together. I choreographed it. We didn't have any props, no bottles or breakaways. We were just duking it out, skin against skin, and it was just incredible. The whole crew just stopped and watched the fight. So to this day, I'm going, why can't I get that fight or that? But no, can't get it.
One day, it'll show up someday.
You know, making a documentary like this, has to be extremely hard because you have so many resources to pull from. I mean,
It's tough, yeah.
you must have a lot of stuff on the cutting floor and stuff that you wish that you could put in. I mean, what was it like just getting the rights to these films and these clips?
Well, you do your best you can, and then we're using fair use for a lot. Because there are cases where these are very small films and the filmmakers are dead. I contact their children, and they say, well, use it if you want, that kind of thing. So nobody knows. So there is fair use protection for documentary filmmakers if it's for an educational purpose, which I think it is, because we're talking about an era in film. There are other things that I would like to have included that I didn't know. There is a woman named Hetty Dietz who was the on-set photographer for a lot of independent films. And she gave Gary her photo collection before she died. And I purchased that from Gary. And in it is, Gary was offered a stunt. A truck goes into the water. And he said he wanted $400, right?
Yeah, I wanted $400. It was to go off a pier into the water, a pickup truck. But they didn't want to pay me $400 to do it. So they hired another stuntman, Vic Rivers, to do the stunt. And he had his wife and son with him, but he had never done that particular gag. You have to wait down the back of the pickup because the motor is going to push you right down. which he did not do. So when he went off the pier, the
They
pickup
walked
truck
back.
went straight down into 20 feet of mud, and they couldn't get him out, and he suffocated with his wife and
Yeah, and there's a
child.
series of photos that I have by Hetty Dietz of this happening,
Of
and
it
then of the
happening.
rescue attempt.
Yeah.
It's it's really sad.
As a stuntman, you really got to know science too. You know,
Yeah,
how far to jump a car, or how to weigh down a vehicle, or whatnot.
Absolutely. That's a good comment. Again, when we do car chases, you start off, all the stuntmen get together way ahead of time, and you have little toy cars, and you all work out what you're going to do with toy cars before you go and actually do it. And then you'll do a couple of dry runs at half speed, never full speed, until you're actually doing it. But pertaining to, do I have a film that I wish had gotten shown that wasn't? I made a film here years and years and years ago called The Pyramid. My friend Larry Ratliff, who's right behind you, was a big part of that, partially based on things Larry told me about his career. And we made it years and years ago. It's a very strange film about consciousness. And I had my actors acting with real leaders in the Edgar Mitchell, who was Sixth Man on the Moon, Thelma Moss, who was head of neuropsychiatry at UCLA. So I had my actors interacting with real people in the consciousness movement. It opened and it did great business in Texas, except the distributor was cooking the books and stealing all the money. So I took him to court, and I won, but it took me a year. I got the film back, and I couldn't do anything with it because I was out of money. I had to go back doing stunts. I set it in my garage, where Joe discovered it years later. Long story short, the Alamo Theater bought it from me.
Draft House Films.
Yeah,
Yes.
several years ago, and they're going to show it on Turner Classic Underground Movies or whatever it is.
Turner-
so
yeah,
after
TCM
40
Underground
years,
in
40
November.
years, our film is going to finally show there.
We're trying to set up a double bill of The Pyramid and Danger God in Dallas, because this was shot in Dallas.
Right.
The Pyramid was shot in
What year?
Dallas. 1970 something?
1973,
Yeah,
and we released it in 75 until I stopped.
yeah. So very much a Dallas film. And he met his wife, Tommy, who's talked about in the documentary, doing that production. She was an actress in it. She was the lead actress. And y'all were, I don't know, were you dating? You started dating after the production or whatever, right?
Kind of after, yeah.
Yeah.
4 terabytes of raw material.
Wow. This is the editor.
Yeah.
Of this.
Lots of
Danger
stuff.
God.
And went through all of his home movies.
That's it.
All the old films, get all these clips together. It was madness. But I loved it, every bit of it, because Gary is an unknown hero to me, because I, in Austin, worked at Austin Access TV, and I was doing a schlocky Cheek Peeks TV show, much like sneak previews, but we did these schlocky films, and I was watching all of Gary's films, Hells with Angels on Wheels, and then when Joe called me, I need an editor to finish my movie. And so I met Gary years before, but
Hell's Angels on Wheels is not a schlocky film. by
No,
the
it's
way.
actually pretty good. Yeah.
It's a good film. In fact, most bikers will say Easy Rider is not the quintessential biker film. Hell's Angels on Wheels
It was
is.
a very daring film at the time.
Yeah, it includes actual Hells Angels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
Sonny
yeah,
Barger.
including the leader of the Hells Angels, Sonny Barger.
Directed by my favorite director, Richard Rush, who
Yeah.
did The Stuntman, Freebie and the Bean, Color of Night, Getting Straight.
You know, with you being in Westerns, what did you think about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? And also, too, what did you think about, you know, The Hateful Eight? Because those, to me, are the most current films that have, well, Hateful Eight is a Western, but, you know, Once Upon a Time has a lot of Western scenes. What did you think? Did it get the feel of the old Corriganville, Spawn Ranch, Iverson Ranch stuff, or did it not get it?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood did. I loved it. And they had a really good recreation of the Spawn Ranch. Spot on. Except George Spawn's house wasn't up on that little bluff. It was on level ground. It had steps going up to a little porch, but you didn't go up the hill to get in. And Tex Watson was not a horseman. He didn't go near a horse.
Oh.
They had him galloping around, and once upon a time in Hollywood, that was not Tex. Tex was just weird and crazy, and he walked around all the time with guns on his hips. But he didn't know anything about horses. That was all 3 other guys.
What was George Spahn like? I mean, I heard he was a quirky character.
He was. He was blind, of course. I never saw him in bed, but Bruce Dern sort of had him spot on in a way that kind of looked like George. But George was always sitting at a table. You'd go to his house. I production managed a lot, so I would have to go to George Spahn and make arrangements for us to shoot there. You'd walk in his house, and the minute you went in, the smell would just kill you. There'd be rats everywhere and old food all over the table, and George would be sitting there with a cup of coffee, blind, with Squeaky Frome looking after him, one of the Manson girls. And he would sit there drinking his coffee and up the price, or try and up it for shooting there all the time. So Bruce kind of had him down because he was kind of cranky. He had a good sense of humor. But again, he didn't know it because he couldn't see it. But his house was just a rat's nest of filth.
Did he get along with Ray Corrigan and the other ranch owners in the area?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know if he did. I do not know the answer to that.
And did you meet Ray Corrigan?
I did not meet Corrigan. I shot there, but I never met Ray. You know. Again, this fellow Edwin Caldman, who wrote the book about Shorty Shea. Shorty Shea was a stuntman at the Spahn Ranch. He wasn't really a stuntman, but he wanted to be. He had this stunt. Chuck was telling about it today to us. He would, when the real stuntmen were there, he'd say, "Hey, I've got a stunt I bet you won't do." And we would say, "Well, there's a lot of stunts we won't do." And he'd say, "Watch this." And he'd tie a rope around his neck and then get a horse and tie a rope around the saddle horn. Then he'd throw a rock at the horse so the horse would take off and drag him by the neck. And I said, "You're damn right I won't do that." Who would do that? You know? But they were always around. Those were the guys that wrangled the horses at the Spahn Ranch. The Manson clan had little to do with the horses. Again, and once upon a time in Hollywood, it has them taking people on trail rides. They did not do that. It was Shorty Shea and Juan Flynn and a couple of sort of wranglers that hung around them. But the Manson people just sort of lived off in the old buildings and stuff. And they would come around and beg our lunches from us when we were, "Can I have your cupcakes? Can I have your sandwich?" You know, that kind of thing. So we just knew them as these sort of unkempt people that hung around the set. Mostly girls. There'd be a couple people, but a couple of guys, but mostly girls just hanging around. Very strange.
But you like Brad Pitt's portrayal.
I like Brad Pitt. I thought he was spot on. Spot on.
You ever go back and visit the old ranches, walk around?
I have not. Again, that's a good question. The last time I was at Spahn Ranch, it wasn't there. It had already been demolished. I went looking for it with some other people, long gone. And I did not go to Iverson's or Corriganville.
Corriganville is now a regional park. I go biking there when I'm in town.
Do you really? Yeah. Oh, I'll be
And you
done.
can still see like the Sherwood Forest when they would film the running. You still have the road where the camera car would go down and
Right.
underground tanks. And things.
Oh, I'll be darned. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check it out next time I go to LA. But I remember that in Vasquez Rocks. Remember Vasquez Rocks? I shot my first Western ever at Vasquez Rocks. The old days.
The old days where there was no people, no traffic, no.
No, nothing. No.
Now you have CV Valley that's growing up around
Oh,
there.
yeah.
So tell us about your interaction with Charlie Manson.
My interaction with Charlie, although I would see him hanging around a lot, I didn't know who he was. He was just one of the people. But we were using a dune buggy that belonged to my buddy Bud Cardos as a camera car. And it broke down, and I needed to get it fixed. I was the production manager. So I asked Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the girls, We hired them as extras sometimes. I said, I need to find a good mechanic. Do you know one? And she said, yes, we got a great mechanic. And she brought over Charlie Manson. She said, so I met Charlie and I said, I need this dune buggy fixed. And he said, I can fix it, but I need $70 up front. So Bud gave him $70. I just saw him as this little guy. He didn't have these big, scary eyes or anything. He was just like a little shoplifter or something. And we came back the next day and it was not fixed. So I said, get me Charlie. And they went and brought Charlie over and I said, Charlie, you'd better fix this dune buggy. And that's not what I said, but that's close enough. And so he got under it and fixed it right away. And that was my meeting with Charlie Manson.
How many days or weeks or months before?
We found out.
No, yeah, before the Manson.
Not long, because at that time when I hired him to do the dune buggy, they had already done the murder.
Oh, they had.
Yeah, because we shot there, so we had no idea. They were getting ready to move out to the Barker Ranch at that time, but the murders had already happened. We had no, except Shorty Shea, the stunt guy who got dragged by the neck, had disappeared. And we were all going, what happened to Shorty Shea? What? We did not know that Charlie had killed Shorty Shea. Most people know the Rosemary LaBianca and her husband and Sharon Tate had all been murdered, and most people know that. But also Shorty Shea, this wonderful guy who wanted to be a stuntman. We found out years later what had happened to him, but people were just going, what happened to that great guy, Shorty Shea?
Wow.
Yeah, he was one of the victims. Scary thing. And then Al Adamson, Joe mentioned, I had talked to Al. This director I liked a lot. I did several films for him, mostly bad films, but hey, it was work. And he gave a lot of work, as I say, to the old-timey actors like Scott Brady,
Dracula versus Frankenstein.
Jim Davis, and those guys. So Al called me. Someone said, Gary Graver, a cameraman, called me and said, Al Adamson, who was living in Palm Springs, would like to talk to you. I hadn't talked to him for years. He said, give him a call. So I gave Al a call. And, I love hearing from you. I'm getting ready to do more films. It's wonderful. I'm going to do a film about outer space, blah, blah, blah. I only have one problem. The guy I hired to do construction on my house has been stealing from me. And I'm going to confront him. And I said, gee, Al, I hope that goes well. And hung up, and then I didn't hear from Al. And he said he'd call me, he was going to send me a script. It didn't happen. And then time went by, and I called, and this strange voice answered the phone and said, Al is in Europe. And I knew Al wouldn't go to Europe. You know, what is that all about? And then about a week later, I got a call from Gary Graver again. He said, guess what? And I said, what? He said, they found Al's body 18 feet under his jacuzzi in his house. The construction guy had hit him over the head with a hammer, killed him because Al confronted him about stealing money. The guy hit him, upended the jacuzzi, buried him down, wrapped in gauze like a cocoon, filled it back up, put the jacuzzi back, cemented around it. So I asked they flew me in to be a witness at the trial. And I asked the detective, how did you know Al was down? And he said, when somebody's missing and you see fresh cement, your mind goes, wait a minute, I'd better see what's under that cement. And that's how they found him.
He's got stories.
Yeah.
He has a lot of stories.
Wow.
One other film that I would have liked to have included, back to that, because I never could find it, and it's a Hong Kong film that he did this flaming car stunt, and this is not that long ago. It's like 90s, right?
Right, late 90s.
And it's called Gun of Dragon.
Gun
of Dragon. And I finally found a DVD of it. So it took me forever to finally find, but it was too late to be in the movie.
Of course.
So,
That film was so much fun. It was, again, a Chinese film company, and we shot in Puerto Rico. I got the call to go down to Puerto Rico, and all the fights were martial arts being done by the Chinese, but they couldn't drive cars for beans, so they hired 4 of us to go down and do all the car work. Puerto Rico was just like a carnival to me. I loved it. And then from there we went to Chinatown in New York to do a car chase. And ever since I'd done car chases in freebie in San Francisco and LA and Seattle, but I always wanted to do New York since French Connections and seeing that movie. And finally on this Chinese film, we got to do we chased each other through all the different boroughs, Little Italy, Chinatown, Manhattan, ended up in a big fiery thing on the Brooklyn Pier. So yeah, that picture was a lot of fun.
I'd like to have that in the documentary.
And film companies are the same, whether you're Chinese or American. They're all the crew is still the same. And I found this out, except for breakfast. At American film, you always have coffee and donuts, and fruit and stuff. The Chinese had hot tea with all these little squiggly things sticking out of it that would be wiggling around. I go, no, thank you. But like an American film company, I just remembered the Stillman, who was a very taciturn fellow, not too friendly. One day I heard the makeup trailer door fly open and this woman come out screaming. The makeup woman, she had a cup of hot tea and she threw it in the face of the still guy that nobody liked anyway. And I thought, yeah, just like American companies, very much the same.
What is the most difficult car to do a car chase in or stunt in? Is there a particular car or brand that's like?
Yeah, avoid Hondas and, all the little Mickey Mouse cars. Helen makes, you don't want to be in that. You want a muscle car, a good muscle car. And of course now, back then we had what we call a flank strap, just like you have on a horse to making buck. You'd have a flank strap running from the undercarriage of the car across the seat. So when you did a car roll, you would throw your arm under that flank and it would pull you down to the seat and the car would roll, but it would seldom go down below how the windows go up where the window sill begins. That's usually where it would stop cratering. So you'd be fairly safe. But now you have a roll cage, stainless steel built in pretty heavy. And you're like this so you don't flop around because that's how you break your neck. So you're just tied in like this when you do the roll, but you've got this roll cage around you.
Is there a stunt that you never got to do that you always wanted to do?
Well, that's a good question. No, to be honest with you, I pretty much got to do all I wanted to do. I wanted to do the car chases. I love car chases. I got to do a bunch of high falls that I'm proud of, that I've done. Did a lot of firework. I was so lucky because right away, I started getting not only good gags to do myself, but I got to direct a lot of stunts. We mentioned Richard Rush, who did Psych Out. Freebie and the Bean. Richard was an action-oriented fellow, but he didn't really direct action. He would turn it over to you, so you would even get your hands on the camera, and you'd get to set up angles and stuff. So I love doing that. I love coordinating stunts. I have a picture called Rainy Day Friends, which starts
directed.
I directed it, and it starts with Esai Morales, the actor, being dragged. He's under a pickup truck. He's trying to steal a radio out of a car, and it turns out it's a plainclothes cop car. And so he rolls out of it underneath the pickup, and the guy comes out to drive the pickup away that he's under. So when he drives it away, a wire coil hanging out the back snares his foot, and it drags him onto the freeway. And he's dragged between all these different cars and things. That won Best Special Stunt in a Motion Picture at the Stuntman's Association Awards. So I'm very proud of that. We got to do that.
It's a cool stunt. Yeah.
It's in the doc.
Yeah, it's in the doc.
It's good.
One of the things with the documentary is that we concentrated on this group of guys who were his stunt buddies. Like we saw Chuck Bale today. There's Bud Cardos. There's Bob Ivey, who's a big car stunt guy, and Don Jones, who's more of a director. But almost all these guys ended up directing second unit. It's kind of a subplot, I guess, in the documentary. These guys wind through the whole story because of his buddies, and they're buddies to this day. We saw Chuck today. We had a screening of the documentary in Phoenix recently.
And Bud Cardos.
And Bud Cardos came in. We were hoping to have Don Jones too.
Yeah, he didn't make it.
Don Jones directed Gary in the great movies Schoolgirls in Chains and The
But those
Forest.
guys, my buddy Chuck Bale and Bud Cardos and Jonesy, they're the last of a breed, because that stunt guy who did everything back in the old days is pretty much over. So it's a whole different game today. So if you see him on the street, go up and give him a hug. They'd appreciate it.
Well, tell us about the documentary. Where can we see it? And
Sure. The documentary is out streaming on Amazon Prime, iTunes, Spectrum if you got Spectrum, and a lot of other places. The DVD is released on Tuesday. Wild Eye Releasing is our distributor, and it's coming out all those normal places. You find it at Walmart and Best Buy and Target, Amazon, of course, all that kind of stuff. Blu-ray comes out from Dark Side Releasing in November, which is kind of cool, and it's got a whole lot of extended footage on it.
And November is also when the Pyramid is
The
playing.
Pyramid,
Yes.
be sure and watch the
on
Pyramid.
TCM.
Yeah.
Do you have a date?
For when it's on TCM?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it's like 20 something. I don't remember. It's listed online on their schedule.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can't remember. I think I gave it to you.
If you get a chance, watch it. There's Brad Rickberg. He's also in the Pyramid. He was
Yeah,
just a kid.
there you go.
Hi, Brad. How you doing? Yeah. It was many years ago. Brad was in my movie. He was just a little boy.
There's a lot of-
Hey, Elliot Ray, how you doing?
There's a lot of guys and ladies who were little kids being extras. There's like a car crash stunt. Were you involved in the car crash? I mean, the bus crash?
No.
No? Okay. Oh, okay. There's a big bus crash with little kids. And isn't that what Rex is in?
Rex Cumming, who I don't know. He's Mark Cuban's partner.
What was Mark Cuban's partner back when they had the tech company that they sold to become rich guys?
Right.
So
But he plays a little kid and goes through the window in this
Yeah.
bus crash.
there's all kinds of ties to Dallas.
And
Dallas story.
pertaining to your question about stunts, that was a stunt that went awry, and how you can fix things that go awry. We hired a guy to roll this school bus. Took the kids out and we put paper mache in the windows to look like kids, their silhouettes and stuff. And he didn't roll it. It didn't roll. He dug a trip trench and he missed the trench and he almost ran over the camera.
Oh.
So what we did is we brought it back and we put a winch around it and we rolled it by wreckers pulling the school bus over. And then I went inside the school bus and had the kids fall around. I would have these little kids fall out of their seats, and I had pads for them, of course. But so when I intercut it, and then I had Rex Cumming, who I mentioned, go through the window of the school bus. We put what we call candy glass in the window, which you can go through and not hurt yourself. So when I cut it all together, you see this horrendous crash, and we never did anything. We didn't hurt anybody, We just faked it.
It looks great.
Was there anything else that you would like to say, or Joe, that you would like to say that we haven't touched on?
I would just like to say thank you all for being here and listening to my BS. I appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot.
I learned how to make a documentary, and I'm making a second one, and it's happened a lot more quickly, and it's somewhat. It came from knowing him, and from knowing him. It's about Robert Burns, who was the art director on the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Bob's obsession. And I knew him a little bit. I knew Bob a little bit. Last years of his life, his obsession with Rondo Hatton. And I don't know if any of you are horror people, but the Rondo Awards are the big awards given out in the horror community. Rondo Hatton Bob was a very normal-looking guy who was quite strange, and I mean that in a good way. He was very creative and could do anything. He was the art director on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hills Have Eyes, The Howling, Reanimator, Microwave Massacre, all kinds of classic horror films. And meanwhile, Rondo was a very normal guy who was strange-looking, because he was this actor. He was known as the Creeper. And he had a condition. He was a good-looking, all-American kid, great athlete, wanted to be a coach, and he went off to World War I, came back, got hit by mustard gas, Nobody knows if the mustard gas did it, but he ended up with acromegaly, which is a tumor on the pituitary gland, and it makes your face. And you may not know who he is, but you have seen his face because it is an iconic image. And Bob was obsessed with him, and the movie is kind of about that. It's about their two careers and about that obsession, and about Bob who did not find love and happiness, and Rondo who did. And I kind of like that story. We showed him some of the rough cut. We have a rough cut as of last week. So
And when they're done with it, they'll be back.
yeah, we'll be back. Yeah. We'll be back. It's going to be good.
That's it, folks, I think.
Anything else?
That's awesome.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.